Science fiction or science fact? Always questions, but what about the answers? Hello and welcome to the first of our special reports looking into the phenomenon of UFOs. In this programme we'll be hearing first-hand accounts from witnesses and looking into one of the UK's most famous UFO events known as the Bentwaters case. Later on I'll be discussing it with UFO researcher Timothy Good. Of course, there's a huge debate over just what we mean by UFO. Our authorities say there's no evidence that they're extraterrestrial. They're just unidentified intrusions into our airspace. In all the cases where no rational explanation was found, no threat was posed to our defence, and hence they are of no defence significance. But for the people who see these objects, they certainly are significant, as we'll be finding out. One evening, about 9:30 last March, Marilyn Preston and her two daughters were driving home. Kerry, the youngest, saw a light out of the window. What at first they thought was a star turned out to be a huge craft slowly flying over their car.
At first I thought I was a Harrier jet, and when I asked my husband, he said, "No way would you have gone under a Harrier jet." That was massive. I'd say at least 100 feet, because 4 lanes across the road. And with that, we just unwound the windows. There's no noise whatsoever, it's just silent.
I looked out the window and that was yellow under the bottom and then a blue fluorescent light and then big and grey.
A UFO, definitely. Like a mothership, really, how big it was.
It lasted only a few seconds. The ship suddenly just shot away and vanished. It was an unnerving incident.
I wanted to get home quick because Kim, as I said, she was going frantic in the back of the car. She's on the car floor. And all she was doing was screaming.
It was about 11 o'clock on an August evening in 1991 when Liz Ibbotson saw dancing lights in the sky over her farmhouse. Air traffic controllers couldn't explain it. No planes were flying at the time. Her 18-year-old daughter raised the alarm when she saw objects out of the bedroom window.
I stood and watched for a few minutes, and sure enough, it was a red and green light flashing, sort of blipping about. But instead of just being in one place, it actually was blipping here and there and all over. And I thought, well, aeroplanes don't do that. And we watched it come right across here and followed it right the way around to the front of the house, that side. I had no idea what it was. I didn't really think of UFO, to be quite honest. I just thought, I don't know what this is. It's strange, it's weird. And the only time I got really frightened was when it hurtled itself from that top corner of the field towards the farmhouse, and I thought it was going to smash straight into the farmhouse. I thought it was going to crash into us.
The story was printed in the Hull Daily Mail. Other people then wrote to the paper saying that they too had seen a similar object.
I must have had between 30, 40 calls easily, and all of them giving similar descriptions to red and green lights flashing. And, you know, just they had no explanation. They just said it just was so strange. They'd seen it playing around in the sky.
At the bottom of the field stands the Star public house. It was at the same time that Joyce Porter saw a bright light over the farm.
A big bright glow, just very bright. Nothing like a star, nothing like an aircraft, or just something I just couldn't say what it was.
We came down and there was an oblong shape about that sort of size, by that, just suspended there, just this bright oblong light. And I just didn't know what to do then. I sort of freaked. I thought, oh God, what is it?
Stories like those are not untypical. UFO researchers claim they've documented literally thousands of cases over the last 30 years or so. Here, there are two main organisations that investigate UFOs: Bufora, the British UFO Research Association, and Quest International. Quest tends to favour an extraterrestrial explanation. Bufora is more sceptical, but both organisations have evolved a country-wide network of groups.
Get this one.
Every 2 months or so, members of the northern region of Quest International gather to swap information. Some members here represent even smaller local groups from all over the north, and these sorts of gatherings are taking place all over the world. The study of UFOs, ufology, has outgrown being a simple pastime. Now, for its devotees, there are lectures, research and conferences on a global scale.
It's going to be a tremendous conference. The Third World UFO Congress in Tromsø, and if you want details, as I say...
Graham Birdsall is the editor of Quest's magazine. His meetings offer a sympathetic ear.
I would say that you're talking about millions and millions of people. Unquestionably, millions and millions of people are interested in this subject.
There's no doubt whatsoever. There is UFOs out there, or should I say alien spacecrafts. We are all being visited.
You see these things happening, and you know for a fact that it isn't a plane, or B, a star, or whatever, or a planet. There's only one thing it can be. It is literally unidentified.
It was stationary, and then it started to move up. Very slowly at first, there was no vapor trail. And then all of a sudden, it took off at a tremendous speed and vanished instantly.
I've seen this one above me, and it was hovering. There was no sound whatsoever. And to me, that was the real thing.
This amateur video was taken in an area known as Milk Hill in Wiltshire. Kerry Blower, who recorded the film, said the orange light was also witnessed by several others. UFO researchers have reported seeing similar objects, and last year a team led by John Holman filmed another.
As best my memory can tell, where this point of light had been, it was suddenly, its place was taken by a large sphere of orange light. It was perfectly symmetrical, there was no flickering to it, it was absolutely sharp in the black sky.
It was only seconds before the object vanished, leaving the moon alone in the sky. John calculated that it was 3 miles away, hovering over a ridge.
Fortunately, we've got the moon in the same shot, which is very lucky. I've been through some triangulation, measuring the object off against the size of the moon. It measures just over half the apparent diameter of the moon, so it's quite easy calculation. And conservatively, it works out at about 70 feet in diameter. All three of us confirmed that had there been anything to structure it by, like a house it would have dwarfed, an average house.
Objects filmed by amateurs are available from all over the world. This shining disc was filmed in the United States. This triangular craft was recorded in a Soviet republic. Nowadays, many sightings look like this. But critics of such observations say they could be planes. Flight International's Mike Gaines says some objects could even be clouds.
There's a particular cloud formation called lenticular cloud, which assumes disc shapes and little formations of discs, which occurs in wave conditions. That's a wave of air, if you like, usually downwind from a large ridge, especially late in the evening, early in the morning, when the sun's going down or rising. These stand out very well. They look like small saucer-shaped objects.
This cigar-shaped object was reported over mountains in the United States. Could it be cloud? There are also other lights at night that could deceive observers.
This is a searchlight used by meteorological people for weather forecasting. They want to find out what the cloud ceiling is. They shine this light vertically, straight up at the bottom of the cloud, and work it out by triangulation what the cloud base is. However, when they do this, you get a light disc projected, obviously, on the bottom of the cloud. When they swing the searchlight back down again to stow it, this projected light on the bottom of the cloud appears to elongate and disappear at a vast rate of knots across the horizon.
Just how vast the universe is can be demonstrated by the Pioneer 10 probe, launched on the 2nd of March 1972. Since then, it's traveled over 5 billion miles from Earth. On its way out of the solar system, it passed Jupiter and now moves at a speed of over 28,000 miles an hour. Yet to reach the nearest star will take Pioneer 32,000 years, an insignificant distance on the scale of the universe. Just in case it meets intelligent life, a plaque gives our galactic coordinates. But the chances of aliens coming, say astronomers, are negligible. Yet Quest's Tony Dodds is convinced that they do have the technology to get here.
Why shouldn't they exist? Why should we be the only intelligent life in this vast universe? We tend, us human beings, you know, there's a great deal of arrogance about us being the bee's knees and the only thing which is there. But when you look at the scale of what is out there and the potential, is it not feasible that there is intelligent life out there that could be 1 million years in advance of us? And certainly there is a wealth, an absolute wealth of information to say that not only are they coming here, they've been coming here for centuries.
Remarkable UFO incidents to take place in the United Kingdom involved both civilian and military eyewitnesses. It happened 13 years ago in 1980 at the jointly manned RAF US Air Force Base of Woodbridge, Bentwaters in Suffolk. Something is said to have crash-landed into part of a forest that cuts between the two bases. The two military bases lie side by side and are run under joint control. The whole area is surrounded by vast plantations of conifers owned by the Forestry Commission. Men from Woodbridge raised the alarm first, and as a result, several American Air Force men were sent out from the Bentwaters base to investigate. Back in 1980, a time when the East's nuclear threat was still a major concern, strange objects were seen over woods near the air base at Woodbridge. It happened for 2 consecutive nights. On the first night, men reported lights inside a nearby forest, but no formal investigation was made. It was on the second night, December the 27th, 1980, that lights were seen again hovering at the end of the runway. At about 11 o'clock in the evening, Jerry Harris, whose bungalow overlooks the base, saw what he first thought was the lights of a plane, but he soon realized that it couldn't be that because they were on course to miss the runway and crash.
They weren't sort of nice, steady. They were moving about. So I undone the front door of the house and walked out into the yard here where I am now, and I stood watching them. You see, and it's all quiet, and I listened. I couldn't hear any sounds at all.
Guards posted near the end of the runway also saw the lights and reported them to the base commander, who told them to stay on post. He would investigate. On the 13th of January, a surprising 2 weeks later, Colonel Charles Holt of the United States Air Force sent a memorandum of his findings to his superiors. It mentioned strange glowing objects in the forest, depressions in the ground, and a craft that emitted red sunlight that pulsed.
I asked him, did he think it was one of ours, one of theirs, or Russian? And he said none of them.
Manchester solicitor Harry Harris has kept in touch with Colonel Holt ever since the incident. He even went to see him at the Bentwaters base.
He showed us a thick file of diagrams, drawings, statements by the various individuals and witnesses involved. And he also played a tape to us of a sound recording of part of the event, the UFO chase through the woods.
We found a small blast, what looks like a blasted or struck up area here. We got very positive.
According to Colonel Holt, this recording was made while he and some men went into the woods to investigate the previous night's sightings.
You're getting readings on the tree you're taking samples from on the side facing the suspected landing site. Or clicks, backs. They have the strongest point on the tree.
They're using instruments to check for radiation.
There's no clicks whatsoever. A few hot spots. This is strange. It's some type of abrasion or something in the ground where the pine needles are all pushed back while we get a high reading about the deflection of 2 to 3, maybe 4, depending on the point on it.
I sort of watched them, and they were going up, moving about this way and that way, and they were going up and they were coming down. And I sort of watched them for 3/4 of an hour. And all of a sudden, they disappeared. But just before they disappeared, there was a lot of activity on the base. I could hear vehicles running around. I could see the flashing lights of vehicles moving about. And I could hear people shouting. It was quiet, and the wind must have been in this direction. I could hear their voices, and they were calling to each other. And then I could hear the roaring of the vehicles, and which is that time of night. It was unusual.
It's thought that this is where the craft came down. At the time, it was heavily wooded, but storm damage has forced the Forestry Commission to clear the area. What happened that night may never be known, but with help from her co-worker, Dot Street, UFO investigator Brenda Butler decided to try and get at the truth. On the night, Brenda says, there's good evidence for a crash.
The tops of the trees were all knocked off. There was burn marks on the ground. There was depressions on the ground. You know, and very shortly after that, the Forestry Commission came in and knocked all the trees down, cut all the trees down really quickly. They told us it was because of radiation on the trees.
There's no doubt about it. There's some type of strange flashing red light ahead. So it was definitely coming this way. The two pieces of it are shooting off. There's no doubt about it. This is weird. So here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now. And we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. It's unreal. 330, and the objects are still in the sky, although the one to the south looks like it's losing a little bit of altitude. We're turning around, heading back toward the base.
It appears, now we know, that a team of about 3 security officers went out in response to visual sightings of this object crashing down and saw a small object about the size of a car manoeuvring in and out of trees and coming down close to the ground. They got so close to it at one point that one of them tried to climb on top of it and was literally spaced out by the experience.
Bufora investigator and author Jenny Randalls had the tape examined by audio experts in America. She says it wasn't a hoax made in a studio. Colonel Holt just acted on his own initiative and made a recording of the investigation.
Holt appears to have been as surprised as everybody else was. The British squadron leader who was in charge of the base certainly also was mystified as to why there was no follow-up by the Ministry of Defence, as to why this whole thing was basically left as it was. And this is the position we got in the letters from the Ministry of Defence afterwards. They told us that they didn't proceed with an investigation because they didn't consider it to be of defence significance. But how did they know that it wasn't of defence significance? That implies that someone somewhere in the upper echelons of government knew exactly what was going on.
30 foot in diameter, with 3 tripod legs coming down and lights beaming down with aliens, little aliens about 2 or 3 foot high in it coming down. There's other ones who have described it as a shape like a shell, a big silver shape, and others have shaped like sort of like a tortoise shape. It has been like a tortoise back with tiles on it.
The investigating team sent out in 1980 have long since left the Bentwater base. It may soon close down. After the incident, says Brenda, men were quickly debriefed and held to secrecy. Many were sent to other posts in America or even retired shortly afterwards. Ralph Noyes was a senior civil servant at the Ministry of Defence. Among his responsibilities was dealing with the public on the subject of UFOs. He feels that in this case the ministry could have done more to clear the matter up.
What was peculiar about the Ministry of Defence's response was that they were asked as early in 81 what went on around Rendlesham. Were there not funny things seen on radar? Didn't something come down near this important base? And they said, no, nothing. And in effect, I think they lied, which in my day we didn't. We stalled. We refused to answer questions.
They say they have no interest in the event unless it has a defence implication. They say it has no defence implication, but they haven't investigated it. They say they haven't spoken to the eyewitnesses, and yet the operational staff have satisfied themselves that there was no evidence of anything having landed or intruded. Well, Holt and his band of merry men were operational staff. So from whence did the Ministry of Defence get this information?
UFO investigators claim at the time our authorities denied having any information about the incident. But in America, the Holt document was obtained under the Freedom of Information Act. Even so, the Americans had lost their copy and obtained one from our Defence Ministry. So why the secrecy?
If you say nothing happened, were these men mad? If they were mad, why weren't they posted home? Whose finger is on triggers? That kind of awkward question would have arisen, should have arisen. And I think probably the MOD clammed up and actually got to the point of lying in order to avoid that embarrassment.
Initially, it was thought that what the men could have seen was a nearby lighthouse shining through the trees. That theory is now in doubt. So far, no one has a satisfactory explanation. Today, 13 years later, Colonel Holt still holds to what he wrote in his report. The tape, he says, is genuine, and the idea that he mistakenly saw only a lighthouse is absurd. Well, with me now to discuss the affair and other aspects of ufology is writer and investigator Timothy Good. Timothy, do you believe the Bentwaters case involved a UFO?
Well, there's no question about it in my mind. As to what precisely that UFO was, I don't know. I don't know where it came from. I don't know what its purpose was. But the report is very similar to other reports which have been worldwide, as you know. I'm fascinated by the case because it's one of the few where we get clear documentary evidence from the military.
Why exaggerations? Why cover-ups?
Well, there's many reasons, of course, for the cover-up. I think the cover-up goes back to about 1947, when it's my conviction that the United States military actually acquired an extraterrestrial vehicle, or the remains of one, and they've subsequently acquired a number of others since. And one of the reasons for the cover-up is to protect the technology that they have acquired and developed in tremendous secrecy. This is why it's been classified above top secret, and in fact it is the most classified subject in the intelligence community. That can very easily be proven. I mean, it was classified higher than the hydrogen bomb back in the 1950s.
So let me ask you this. What happened at the Roswell crash?
Well, this incident, or possibly several incidents, took place in the first week of July in 1947 in the state of New Mexico in the United States. And according to dozens of witnesses who've now come forward, many of them military personnel, an unidentified object crashed, one of them 175 miles northwest of Roswell. And according to the intelligence officer in charge of the recovery operation, there was tons of this material scattered all over the desert, and he investigated this himself, and he said it was like no known metal. He tried to dent it with a sledgehammer and was unsuccessful. It was extremely light and tough and resilient, and he's personally convinced that it bore no relation to any standard aircraft wreckage.
What else was retrieved, or was it just the metal?
No, according to other reports, bodies were retrieved several miles from that particular site, and at another site about 150 miles away, also in New Mexico, on the plains of San Agustin. And a number of people have come forward claiming to have been involved either at the site or later on during autopsies and so forth.
What use do you think the Americans have made of the technology they found at Roswell then?
Well, I'm convinced that they have been studying it for several decades, and they've now reached the point where they have been able to test fly a craft. Whether the craft itself is actually extraterrestrial or a modified version of one, I'm not absolutely certain, but I'm totally convinced that they have the technology to neutralize gravity, if you like, and they have a phenomenal propulsion system which immediately puts everything else out of date that we have.
Timothy Good, many thanks indeed for coming in and talking about UFOs.
Thank you.
I'm afraid we'll have to end things there. Thanks very much for joining us for this edition of UFO. We'll end by showing amateur pictures taken near a US base in Nevada. It's said you can see the objects on an almost weekly basis. From me, until the next time, goodbye.